All right. Hello, everyone. Welcome to the Millennials Are Old podcast. And you know what? I don't even have an introduction today. Can't even have an introduction today because we
Can't
have,
even put into words
yeah,
our enthusiasm.
because no joke, we have guests on our podcast for the very first time ever. And without further ado, I'd like to introduce Scott Galbraith and Shawn Justice, both the writer and star and director of The Reconciler. Welcome, gentlemen.
Hello.
Hello, thank you so much.
Yes, thank you for having us.
Thank you so
Absolutely.
much.
I mean, honestly, thank you guys so much for reaching out in the first place. Because when we put up our review, I said to myself, this is a cute little funny review. This won't go anywhere. Hopefully it gets like 40 views. And then I saw you posted on our YouTube video, and I said, wait, is this the actual Scott Galbraith
Yes, it
posting
is.
on our YouTube channel?
And legitimately, like your response was so I mean, just the fact that anyone listened and that you took the time to, because you did, address some of the questions that we had even in your initial comment. Like I really admired that. I thought that was really cool. And I thought like when you said you'd be open to coming on, I think we both thought like, well, yeah, I think that'd be a fair and reasonable thing. And you reached out in, I thought, a really cool and a really dignified way. And I just,
Mhm.
it's thank you a lot.
Well, you're welcome. I will say this. You guys, I think, are now the fourth podcast that Shawn and I have done a follow-up interview for a review of our film. And one thing I've said in the other podcasts is that, there's that old saying, there's no such thing as bad publicity. And Shawn and I, we made this movie 8 years ago. And for some strange reason, now that we've cut through, we won't go into the problems we had with the original distribution deal, but it took Shawn in particular this long to cut through all the red tape so that he could get the rights to the film back and get it properly distributed. And then all of a sudden, I just noticed that after Curtis Connors did a review of the thing, they were popping up all over the place. And I'm not going to lie. Some stuff that people say, I have kind of looked at and shook my head. Some stuff I've laughed at. And I could have gone on the defensive route. I could have gone on the videos and just defended it to the hilt, but I realized, what would that accomplish? I would live up to every stereotypical stereotype about judgmental Christians, and it would be the very opposite of what the film is about, which is talking. You know what I mean? So I decided, let me reach out to some of these people and say, okay, you have some points, but there's some stuff you don't know. And so I kind of wanted to share with the people who did the reviews, okay, we can explain some things about what went into the film, and it might make more sense as to why things are the way they are in the movie.
Yeah, I mean, I truly, I've spent basically since you reached out with us trying to come up with, questions for you guys that I thought would be interesting for you guys. I didn't want to waste your time. I wanted to, because, when you review an independent film, a small film, it's a little different. And I want to give anyone a chance to say what they want to say. And it did seem like you guys had things to say that, like, it seems like there were things that we were wrong about or we were missing some context for.
Well, what would you like to know?
I
Well,
think you said introductions, or what do you guys want to do?
yes, I was
Yeah.
just about to ask Shawn, would you like to introduce yourself as well?
Yes, I'm very sorry. I do that a lot. Yeah. Oops, Shawn, I did it again. I kind of hijacked the conversation. Sorry, go ahead.
That's all right. I'll always help you back. So,
Yeah, and you do it so well. You do it so well.
well, I'll start. My name is Shawn Justice. I've been I guess you call it a filmmaker for the 30 plus years. I've actually had my own film and video production company since 1989. I was in a partnership before that. I went to Performing Arts High School to learn television and film. But most of my work has been in corporate film and video. We've done commercials, promotional videos, but always had an interest in narrative. And the funny thing is, I never was like, oh yeah, I want to do short films first. I was, one of those, I want to do a feature film first. And I did. I shot my first one in 1999, ultra low budget, and got that out. It's called Going the Distance. And then I just kept writing after that. Didn't have really any opportunities to do films. I self-funded the first one. And then we ended up connecting. Scott and I connected. He found me on some network or actually through, I think, a mutual friend.
Facebook friend.
Yeah, that's right.
We were introduced by a mutual Facebook. I had written I had written a script that I won't go into because it's too long to explain, but I will tell you the title. It was called The Twin Master. And a mutual Facebook friend of me and Shawn's, who to this day, neither of us have ever met, by the way, had said to me, "Wait, Scott, you're trying to make a movie about twins that's a Christian film? I actually know a Christian filmmaker who's a twin. His name is Shawn Justice. He might be interested." And that's kind of where it all started.
Yep.
Yeah.
Yep. So we've been trading back and forth stories, and I've continued my corporate level. I do a lot of construction company videos. I do a lot of work for a company called Kiewit for about 5 or 6 years, traveled all over. But again, my heart was always to do narrative. And so all in all, I've done 5 features, a couple of shorts. I've had other filmmaker friends hire me to DP because I bought a Red camera about 10, 11 years ago. So yeah, that's kind of where I've come from. So my bread and butter really is doing commercials and that type of thing. So,
and then you supplement that when you have time or when you have funds to do the features that you like to do.
Yeah, and I've sold scripts. I sold one script. It was called Justice because I couldn't come up with a better name for it at the time. Sold that. It became a film that was on Netflix for quite a long time. Had Stephen Lang as the villain in it. And it's still available, I think, on Amazon Prime.
Wow. Really? The antagonist of Avatar. You made a movie with that guy in it. That's crazy.
Yeah. I didn't direct it. A friend of mine directed it. But they bought the script from me because I was in the middle of prepping to shoot my third film after The Reconciler called Out of the Darkness with Graham Greene.
Oh, and then Scott, did you want to give kind of a history maybe of your bona fides?
Well, I started performing in one way, shape, or form when I was 6. I'm a magician by trade. I do I do parties and I do church programs and stuff like that. And my acting film resume is actually pretty short. To this day, I only have 4 IMDb credits. 3 of them Shawn directed me in, and 2 of them I wrote the script with Shawn. So that gives you an idea as to how I've gotten most of my work. But
like Quentin Tarantino.
Yeah, well, yeah, exactly, yes. Anyway, so, but, I guess you could say filmmaking has always been something that I was interested in getting into, but more so the writing. When you're younger, you want to just do everything yourself. But as you get older, you realize what your strengths and your weaknesses are. And one of the reasons why it's so great that I connected with somebody like Shawn is that I'm not a film director at all. I'm somebody who's got an overactive imagination and is very good at outlining the first part of the script and coming up with story points. But my dialogue sounds kind of like church drama because the very first thing I ever wrote was a church skit. And Shawn, on the other hand, is a master of making dialogue flow. So it's kind of, we've said this before, the analogy that my friend Alan, who directed the first film I was in, The Dark Disciple, if you guys want to check that out on Amazon, that's an action film. I was explaining to him how Shawn and I have written all of our scripts. Me writing one of us comes up with an idea. I've written the first draft, and then Shawn has, I jokingly call it justifying the script, but kind of finessing it up. I said that to Alan, and he goes, "So basically, Scott, you build the tire, and Shawn figures out how to make it run." And I'm like, "Yeah, I guess you could. I guess that's an analogy. That's the way you could put it." But it's collaboration at its finest. I've actually had people say to me, "Scott, you were very trusting to let somebody who, at the point you'd never met, you'd only talked to on the phone. Weren't you worried, or weren't you offended that Shawn was going to change too much?" And I'm like, "No, every time Shawn has rewritten one of my scripts, he's always improved them. I mean, you guys have said that Reconciler was a movie that was so bad that it was good. You should have seen the original play. I would really be interested to see what you guys said about that, because Shawn's dialogue rewrite was a big improvement on the original play. So, but anyway, I still do magic. I still do magic shows to this day. I've become a Mario impersonator. Hello, it's me, Mario. Cool. How are you? I have a cosplay group and stuff like that. So, and it's just being a Christian myself, I kind of was always interested in getting into Christian films and such. And sometimes things don't work out the way you plan. Like Shawn and I still have not made the movie that brought us together in the first place. Well, Reconciler first because of some things that happened in life that, well, I'll let Shawn talk about that if he wants to. So, but I hope that answers your question about what my background is.
No, for sure.
Very well. Do we want to segue then maybe into how Reconciler specifically came about?
Sure. Yeah. So what happened is I was writing a bunch of screenplays. I had a couple of, I guess you call them near misses on financing for a couple of those scripts. And in 2012, I was having a very good year with corporate work. And we sent my two oldest sons off to camp during the summer. And that was on a Sunday. And on Monday, I got a call from his youth pastor that there was a very bad accident that happened, and my second son drowned that day. And it was a big shock, but he was an amazing kid, and my wife and I have no regrets about having an amazing kid and the time, and feel very blessed the time that we're allowed to have with him. But what came out of that was some insurance that came out of that, insurance money, without getting into all the details of that. But sure. We wanted to do two things with those funds. One was to preserve his memory within our family. So we bought a cabin at a place we like to go to called Sun River, and it's called Caleb's Cabin. And so we spent a lot of family time there. And that was because we'd rent houses there before. It's about 4 hours from the Portland area. And the other part of what we wanted to do is kind of fun projects that may have been his vision, because he had a really strong, as Christians say, walk with the Lord himself. He was very engaged in his prayers and he walked it in so many ways. And so that was really cool to see. So when Reconciler came about, Scott had done a church play, and I wanted to, I hadn't done a film in, 14 years or so. So I was like, well, I don't think I want to tackle anything too crazy out of some of the other scripts I had written.
This is kind of a script. It is very much like a play, sort of a single location.
Yeah. Mm-hmm. Yeah. And it was even more of a play in the original, of course, script. But the beauty of it was that it was limited locations. When we put it together, we shot the entire film in 11 days, which that's pretty aggressive.
Yeah.
For a feature. But it was just one of those things where it was meant as a kind of get your feet wet project. Right. I had another co-producer at the time that I had helped him on a couple of his films. And it was like, all right, time for you to help me with mine. And so he was able to help put together some of the locations. The basement location was actually in his office building, or his building where he was at. And some of the other locations and actors. He was the one who originally knew Roddy Piper. And he asked Roddy and he and I both asked Roddy if he would, come on board for a day to shoot some cameos for a particular role in the film. And so it was cool the way it all kind of came together, when it was just like, hey, let's just go out and have some fun.
Just hit the ground running.
Yeah, it kind of built up to what we had. It was no, feature multi-million-dollar film, but it was something that we wanted to go out and enjoy, and we did. We had a blast. It was crazy. We shot in the first 3 days, we shot 11 or 12 pages a day of the script, which is crazy. Yeah.
That's
and
wild.
That has a whole story in itself that we ended up doing, because Scott was in Boston and the twins were in LA. We did these Zoom calls probably a month or two ahead of time, and we would basically do rehearsals over Zoom, and they would get better and better. And I'd make directorial comments of, well, you probably want to pause a little bit longer before you say that because of this, and this. And so when we hit the ground running shooting, they knew their stuff, which was great. It made the 12 pages a day go by. We never really felt like we were, not going to make it. So it was great. Credit to those guys for sure.
Part of it, I just wanted to add to that Jeremy and Jordan Steele, who played the twins, I had actually done 2 other plays with and had done a few birthday parties with. So I knew I worked with them very well. And we actually adapted the script for them. In my original play, the characters were a mother and a daughter. So we actually changed it so we could use it because they were going to be in Twin Master if we had gotten that funded first, but then they aged out the parts. And this is something I've mentioned on other podcasts before. It came down to that it was easier to rewrite the script for them than it was to do a casting call to find a mother and a daughter. So the twin who was in the trunk in the original script was the mother, and the person who wakes up first was the original script was the grown-up daughter. So we changed that.
Okay, interesting. And actually, I did want to add just a little bit here. You know, we talked about the Roddy Piper connection. I mean, for better or worse, I mean, you guys did make filmmaking history for being Roddy Piper's last movie, as I mentioned in the review. But
sad part is I never met him.
Yeah, I remember you mentioned that. It was just Sherry who met him, right? Nobody else on like as the actor on the set.
Right, pretty much.
Most of his scenes were just her.
Yeah, and I had my co-producing partner had worked on a pilot. Believe it or not, a wrestling show with him.
Imagine that.
Imagine that. And my partner brought me in on that to be a cameraman, and Roddy and I got to talking, and Roddy's like, I want you to be my personal cameraman for this show. And so
Very
I spent a lot of time together, which was great. He's just, his persona on, as you guys may have heard, his persona on the stage was the tough, mean, villain. Yeah, but in person, he was just a big teddy bear. I mean, he was an intense guy. I mean, when he had heard about my son's passing, he like took his hand and put it on the side of my face and got real close to me. And I'm going, oh, what's he going to be? This is Roddy Piper, right? He's going to throw me down? Or what? And he's like, I'm so sorry, Shawn, about your son. And it was just like, you're just like, oh my gosh. And you could tell he meant it in the intensity in his eyes because he had a son about the same age, I believe. So it was a neat moment.
Yeah, 100%. And if you don't mind, Brian, I'll go on this one. But it honestly, hearing that story from you, it makes a lot of the scenes in the movie make more sense, I would say. Do you think that you made well, of course, obviously Scott wrote the film, but do you guys think you made the movie with the intent to make it as a sort of tribute to your son?
Yeah, I think so. He's credited as the sole executive producer of the movie. And it was, his heart was to see people to get along. He loved to mediate and help with people too. So yeah, I think there's some of that for sure.
And Brian, I don't mean to put you on blast here a little bit, but I think you had a little bit of an anecdote about that, correct? With your own family?
So actually, after watching The Reconciler, despite, our review and, any like jokes I made or anything, after I watched it, I actually couldn't shake. There's a member of my family who I've been very close to for a long time. This is real, by the way. After watching The Reconciler, even after making fun of it or whatever, I did find myself thinking I should get back in touch with this person. This is I haven't spoken to them in 8 or 9 years. I moved far away. And that's the thing that's been on my mind, as these things are for years. But no joke, watching The Reconciler did put in my head, I was like, oh, it is a good idea to reach out to this person, because this is my family. This is someone that, raised me, that I love. So, and it's funny because I kind of remember thinking that in the back of my head right after I hadn't spoken to this person in years, watching the movie and thinking, well, that's silly. All right. And then it just kept creeping in my head again over and over. And literally probably a week after we watched The Reconciler, I reached out to who I have not spoken to in a long time, who I love very much and have missed very much, of course, this whole time. And it is directly, at least in part, because of The Reconciler put those notions in my head. I did want to share that with you guys. Well, because
that's awesome, brother.
It is awesome. It's kind of the reason why we made the film. And to be honest with you, one thing that I will share with you guys is that one thing that some other people have said in their reviews, or we'll call them comedy videos about reviewing our movie, is the fact that they thought that some of the reasons why the people were locked up was were like too petty, or they would forgive each other quicker or whatever. And I'll tell you a little secret here. I have never, it's the small things that for some strange reason people just hold on to. I've even seen people in my own church who are just not talking to each other because of in a belief system where it's supposed to be forgive and forget. They will let somebody who has had an entire lifetime of failures, who is humbly coming to Christ, come in the door, but their fellow brother in Christ makes one little hiccup or whatever, and then they're just not. I mean, one of the things that I should mention is that Taylor, I believe you told me, you had asked me, what did I think of people calling this the Christian Saw? Mm-hmm. They can call it the Christian Saw all they want, but it's not a Saw ripoff. I did not come up with the idea because of Saw. Mm-hmm. I came up with the idea because I watched the sitcom Perfect Strangers, if you can believe that.
Yeah, I remember you mentioned that, and I've not seen the show, I'll be honest, but I know about Balky and Bronson Pinchot. So I was like, when you said that, I'm like, oh, okay, I kind of get it. I can see where that comes from.
There was an episode in the 3rd season where Balky lends Larry's car to his girlfriend without asking his permission, and then Larry spends the first half of the episode basically giving Balky the silent treatment, and a security guard lets Balky play with his belt, and Balky finally has it, so he walks right up to him and handcuffs himself to Larry and says, I'm not giving you the key until you talk to me. Of course, then they make up, the key breaks, and they spend the rest of the episode handcuffed to each other. And that would be enough, but at the time the 5th season was airing, I had seen that episode in a syndicated rerun. And it just so happened that in the same week, there was an episode in the 5th season where Larry and Balky's girlfriends, who were roommates, were fighting about something very petty. And so Balky and Larry orchestrate this plan to get them in their apartment, lock the door, and throw the keys out the window. And they say to them, okay, the door's locked, the key's gone. Now nobody is leaving here until we get this matter settled. And the very first thing that one of the girls says is, okay, well, I'm calling a locksmith to get us out of here. And I look at that and I go, okay, you would rather spend a ton of money on a locksmith than make up this. I mean, it dumbfounds me. I mean, there's a very popular show called Cobra Kai. Maybe you guys have heard of it.
Oh yeah, the sequel show to Karate Kid. Yeah.
Do you know how many people have said to either Ralph Macchio or William Zabka when they've met them, I wish I could lock Daniel and Johnny in a room together until they work everything out. And then surprisingly, Johnny does that to his son and his future stepson who are fighting in an episode in the 5th season. Mm-hmm. So this is not, the idea kind of came from the idea that a lot of people say, oh man, wish I could just lock you up until you guys worked out this thing you're being stupid about. So that's the reason 100%. Why it's nothing major. Yeah. So, and so like I said in another podcast, I kind of toyed with that idea for a while. And then when I had done 3 plays for my church that were open to the public that had gone very well. And then just to kind of like keep my overactive brain busy, I dusted this idea off, and I really did not think the play was anything special. It was kind of a filler. It was kind of something I just wanted to do just to do something. And when I was rewriting it again, I mentioned it to a friend of mine who did not go to my church, and the first words out of his mouth are, Scott, this sounds an awful lot like Saw. So I watched Saw despite not being a horror movie fan. And I was convinced I was also convinced it would never go here. Boy, was I wrong on that.
Yeah. I was actually just about to ask you, so when it comes to the comparisons to Saw, I will say one thing you do better in The Reconciler than Saw is your American accent is much better than Cary Elwes's American accent. I'll just say that. He slips in and out of that accent so many times in that movie. It's very funny.
Yeah, it's funny.
I haven't brought this up in any other interviews that we've done, but there's one other thing that Saw and us have in common that no one ever points out. Okay. And that's the fact that one of the 2 main leads is written by one of the writers of the script.
Oh, that is also very true. Yeah. Oh God.
The guy who wakes up in the bathtub in Saw wrote the movie.
Yeah, no. So, I think we actually mentioned that in the
I'm
the
sure
episode.
You did, Taylor. Taylor is our resident Saw expert. I think I've seen them once, but Taylor is like an encyclopedia of Saw.
Yeah, I have seen each Saw movie 3 times, and in fact, the director of Saw 6, 7, and now 10, and he also edited all the movies. He actually follows me on Twitter, so that's neither here nor there. I'm not going to brag much longer about that connection, but yeah, I am a huge Saw fan. So when I watched this movie, I did see definitely some similarities, Scott, with you and Dr. Gordon, and also Jigsaw a little bit.
Yeah.
Which, to be fair, I mean, that's the fact some people were able to see that connection when there wasn't already that in the case is pretty impressive.
Yeah, we're very happy, I guess, that people are using the Saw comparison because it's like it's kind of like what you were saying about our motivation partially for doing the film is to get people to think about the relationships they have with others. As Christians, we want to have a positive impact and help society be better, and to consider more, I guess, moral questions. I don't know if you call it that necessarily, but just to consider things about restoration, about reconciliation, because the ultimate example that we feel we have as Christians, God reached out to us to reconcile us to himself through Jesus. Right. And so but that can also, we say that goes, that vertical, right? But as opposed to, it still applies, the same principles apply horizontally to our fellow man. And right. So for us to see people, and we've had a lot of people go, after I watched this, I called my son, and I haven't talked to him in a long time. So for us, it's very, I don't want to say satisfying, but because we didn't set out to make a mess.
That's something.
Yeah, we didn't set out to make a message film, but at the same time, if you can have principles that have people go, maybe that little argument I had was someone that,
right,
caused us not to talk for 5 years. It's kind of stupid now. Maybe I should reach out.
Well, and I think part of the thing, even with Scott, when you reached out and Taylor relayed your messages to me initially, is that it got me thinking, it is easy to be cynical, I think, about talking about something and to kind of miss the forest for the trees on something. And I would like to think, because my interest in this podcast, and Taylor's also, I think, has never been, we don't consider it like a comedy thing. We're trying to talk about film, and we're trying to talk about it from a different perspectives, and genuinely to talk about different kind of maybe strange films. But I never want to be cynical about a film, and even less, I don't want to assume that filmmakers are being cynical, which I don't. I hope I never did, but if I did,
no, you didn't. I will say this, since you broached the subject, though, Brian, there were, because I recently listened to the podcast again recently. There were one or two things that you mentioned that I just kind of wanted to, for lack of a better term, just set the record straight on real quick.
Yes.
One of the things that you said is that there was never a crisis of faith in this film. And you're absolutely right. Do you want to know why? Because every Christian movie and their cousin has done that already. We were trying to think outside the box.
No, for sure.
Yeah, okay. I mean, one of the things that, just to give you an idea as to how cynical some church people can be, one person pointed out that the twins weren't even arguing about what they believed. It was just about the way. You have no idea. You have no idea how much I've seen that, actually. I have seen people from different denominations who both believe in the Bible, who are both professing Christians, both of who believe in the term born again believer, and they're not doing stuff together because there's one rule in their doctrine that's different.
And for me, I haven't seen very many Christian films. So, of course, I'm watching this and going, well, where's the crisis of faith? When you say that, I'm like, well, that makes so much sense. That's not a thing that would have, because, of course, I'm expecting that based on my preconceived notions of, what a Christian film is. Mm-hmm. But that makes a lot of sense.
And I could tell you guys, too, I should say I did, because Brian didn't see it, but I just reviewed a Christian film for the podcast again, and I could say that you guys are still the second best Christian movie we reviewed for the show.
Thank you.
Hey, it's Children of Men, The Reconciler, and then I just saw, what was that? Nefarious. That's it. You guys are much better than Nefarious. If you've seen that one.
Thank you.
I enjoyed that movie. I enjoyed The Reconciler way more than Nefarious. I'll just say that.
Yes.
Well, and the interesting thing is the characters. I mean, when you think about it, the army the army guy and his son. They're not dealing with faith. The cops are not dealing with any elements of faith, but it's about the relationship, which and different aspects and I think the biggest thing that we dealt with a lot of this is just the common misunderstandings that people have and their read on certain situations, and how how that plays out, right? There's a lot of things where you're like, you reconcile with someone later, you start talking to someone you're really mad at, and then you're like, oh my gosh, I didn't realize you saw it that way, or and the other person's like, I didn't realize you saw it that way either. So it's just as I think Scott's pointed out before, that we didn't have like a murderer and the victim's wife or husband. We didn't go to
something that'd be harder to reconcile.
Exactly. And much harder, much longer. And I have heard of people forgiving even, a murder of their son or their spouse, but that takes a lot. There's a lot more to unpack with that too. So I think with this, we wanted to kind of do even what might be trivial things to some people, but also something that we could deal with in a short amount of time.
And something that everyone has had that situation.
Yeah.
Right. Exactly.
Yeah.
And in some ways, a lot of people will point out that, God kidnapping people. Well, first of all, let me just set the record straight that we don't think God is actually doing this. This is a movie. This is a movie. There's something about Christian films. I don't know what it is. Maybe it's because Christian films are talking about a God that we believe is real. Everybody takes a Christian film at face value. And it is possible to do fiction in Christian movies. And I think that's something that's one of the reasons why I wanted to do a different genre. I wanted to do a suspense, which not many Christian films are. But it's just the way that people have said, is it really that big of a deal they would do this? I always saw it as God, who is revealed as the reconciler at the end of the movie, was saying, okay, if you guys are going to be this stupid over something this petty, then I'm going to go through the trouble of showing you how stupid you're being.
Yeah, absolutely.
And lock you up until you take care of it.
So yeah, I did want to talk a little bit about some of your other projects, including a project I just watched last night, which was A Murder of Innocence. Now, I'm interested in this project because it was based on a true story of a family up in like the Olympic Peninsula of Washington. Is that correct?
Correct.
Did you know these people personally, or was this a story that was presented to you? Or
no? So this murder originally happened back in, I think, 71 or 72.
Oh wow!
And what had happened was, I think it could have been the same person that connected Scott.
It was Barry. It was Barry.
A guy named Barry Bowen connected myself and this woman who was 82 years old. And she had written multiple autobiographies, and she always wanted to make her books into movies. Mm-hmm. And so she approached me, and it became more of a client approach, where she was able to put the funds together, and then we looked at her stories. Another person previously had written a movie based on that period of her life as well. So she guided the whole thing. It was interesting. It was the first based on a true story movie that I've done. She gave me some liberty, but there was definitely some things where she was, how do I put this, more interested in remaining true to what really happened, as opposed to telling it the best story cinematically.
In the narrative sense.
The narrative. And I would probably never do that again.
Okay.
Yeah, fair.
And I understand now why you buy the rights to a story, because there's things that, and she's a wonderful lady, wonderful woman, and I love her, and she's very loving, but it was just one of those things where I wanted to honor her as the client, for lack of a better word.
Yeah.
And too, so it was kind of a unique situation, but I think in the future I will be buying the rights.
So it was a learning experience.
It
was. Yeah. And she was very strong in what she thought about things, and
willful.
It was great. It was good, but it was like, oh, okay. All right. Well, I guess we're doing it that way.
Yeah, and honestly, it was really cool seeing some of the old Reconciler alumni in it. Like, of course, Frank Chiserin, who played the main pastor in that movie. There was a gentleman who
That was his wife who played Amy, actually.
Oh, really? I didn't know that. Okay.
Real life wife. Yep.
There was a gentleman who was talking about a witness statement over the phone. He kind of looks familiar, but I couldn't quite tell who.
I have no idea what you're talking about.
Yeah.
That was me. That was my cameo.
Yeah.
Little Shawn cameos.
And then also, I did forget to mention when we were talking about the Reconciler still, the dad and then the cop in this movie. Did you find that guy outside of like a Gold's Gym or something? That guy is jacked.
He was introduced to me by the guy who played the pastor in The Reconciler. And she sat down and I knew him. He's actually a real life pastor, retired now, but it was one of the much bigger churches in the Vancouver, Washington area, the Portland suburb. And he was like, "Hey, Shawn," because we already cast him as the pastor. And he's like, "Hey, Shawn, I met this guy and he wants to get more into acting." And it was so funny because I met him at a Starbucks and he was like, Aaron is his name. He's super nice guy, but he like pretended to be an army guy. So he was like gruff and strong, trying to convince me that he wanted the role.
Yeah.
But you were like, "Man, you got it. It's good."
Yeah, I know. It's like, okay, if you can. But
hasn't he been in every feature film you've done since The Reconciler?
Just about. Yeah. No, and I love Aaron. In fact, I'm having coffee with him tomorrow. So
that's beautiful.
Cool.
Oh,
yeah,
and then
we're
also,
good friends.
Also, we totally forgot to mention the undersheriff of that character, Mr. Scott himself. And honestly, I will say it was a movie that I think, not to, if I'm doing my full honest opinion of, I do think it was a better movie than The Reconciler. Although I'll be honest, I enjoyed watching The Reconciler a lot more. It is, and that's the thing. I assume that this movie had a higher budget and it took you had more time to shoot it. Was that correct? Yeah,
20. I think 22, 23 days.
Oh, okay.
And that's, are you guys just more, I'm sorry, I'm trying to remember. Are you more reviewers? Or are you like filmmakers too?
Oh, we're reviewers. I mean, we've been doing podcasts for years now on other projects. And, you and I were in a ill-fated band when we were in college together. Yeah. We're not super like media people or anything, but no, it's
seat of this show is just looking at things from different eras and how they reflect their times.
Only reason I asked is because we've had these discussions with filmmaker podcast guys, and the big moniker or whatever, I can't remember what the right word is, but when you have, of course, more money and a bigger budget, that means you can shoot longer, you have more choices, and it's so funny that people are very critical of, certain low budget films. And it's like, guys, we don't have the budget.
Yeah. No, absolutely. Yeah.
These super high skilled people. So it's so funny to me when people are like, "Oh, yeah, this isn't like Avengers," or, whatever. And you're like, I know.
And I think that's part of the thing too, with, looking back after Scott reached out, we were thinking, like most of the movies we review aren't on this small of a scale. And like, I enjoy very low budget movies. Like genre films, but it's kind of like you take a step back and you go, when you're just talking about an independent film and it's like, you're both, a working writer and director, and it's kind of like, I don't want to put something out there that doesn't give the full story of something or the time you had or the time you had to work. And maybe not fair to what are some other films we've reviewed, like Children of Men or like the movie by the South Park guys, and like that's not, it's not a.
Yeah, that's actually something that I've run into with a lot of the people who have done reviews of our movie. I look at the other films they review, and I see like a guy Nick who we did an interview with. He's reviewed some Hallmark movies. The guy Nick Kirk Connors who reviewed it. I look at all the other stuff, and the one thing I just go is, how in the heck did all of these people find our film? You know what I mean? Because the way I look at it is, when Brad Pitt in the movie Moneyball, when he's talking about where the Oakland A's are in the food chain, he goes, "There are rich teams and there are poor teams. Then there's 50 feet of crap, and then there's us." That's kind of the way that I look at. I mean, I looked it up once. I live in Massachusetts, where the Wahlburgers restaurant is, and I've actually met members of that family. Oh, yeah. And I looked it up once just to satisfy my curiosity. we made The Reconciler for 0.05% of Mark Wahlberg's net worth. That gives you an idea as to how low the budget was.
I mean, in all honesty, I have seen movies with probably 20 times the budget that look worse than The Reconciler. I think you guys did a damn good job.
Thank you.
And also, you guys do have the luxury of shooting in, well, especially Murder of Innocence and Reconciler, in two beautiful parts of the country. I don't live in the Pacific Northwest, but Brian, you happen to be neighbors with Shawn. I won't put this in here, but
yeah,
really?
Yeah, I know. I'm in Portland. I've been here 5 or 6 years now. I don't. It's not so beautiful tonight.
yeah. It's than a few years ago, actually.
Yeah.
In fact, I had a question about shooting location. So there is going back to The Reconciler just for a moment.
Yes, sir.
There's a scene with the detective. Her name's Stacy, I think, the female detective. And there was a scene where she's talking to like the police captain or police chief or something, and it's in front of a bridge. Now, if I'm not mistaken, is that the bridge that's from Portland to Vancouver? Am I wrong about that?
That's the I-5
Yes,
bridge.
I knew it, Brian. I knew it.
Yeah, you called it.
And that was an insert scene that we shot months later, actually. So, yeah.
Because I remember when I watched, because I
think you and your son were the whole crew for that shot, weren't you?
Yeah, it was just my son Joshua and I went out and got that quick little pickup shot.
Nice. Because I remember I visited Portland last year, and we crossed the bridge to it, and I'm watching this, I'm like, that bridge looks really familiar.
Yeah.
So I thought that was a neat little piece of film history. So Brian, we were totally correct. We are a part of film history now that we watch.
Yes,
the
you are.
When people come and visit, when I'm doing my tour of the PNW, I'm going to tell my friends and family, "Oh, that's the bridge from The Reconciler." That's how I'll refer to it from now on.
There you go.
Oh man, but yeah, I know we mentioned another podcast too, but of course, the lead of Murder of Innocence, and as well as one of the people with with a lot of credits. How exactly did you guys get Frank Chisser in? Because he's been like an extra in a lot of stuff.
Oh yeah, and he's actually extremely fluent in French as well, and he's been on multiple shows up in French. He's from Alberta, I believe, or Toronto. He's from Toronto, and so and he was had a little part in one of the, what was that movie, Scott? The sci-fi. They made a multiple. Scott, can you hear me?
Yeah, I can hear you. I'm just trying to think of what it is.
Yeah,
I recognized him from the Canadian show Flash.
Yeah, so
I don't know what sci-fi thing he was in that you're talking about, but
it was I can't remember the name of it. It's very.
He's been on Suits.
Yeah.
So, yep. That was the credit that I saw. I'm like, wait, he was in Suits?
Yeah.
Like what?
Yeah. Yeah. What's the one sci-fi movie series where it's the gal who the Djanovic or
you know what? The Resident Evil series.
Yes, Resident Evil, that's it.
Yeah.
That's it. He was in that.
And
one of the episodes, one of the
I think I looked him up on Letterboxd, and he was in Apocalypse, which is the second one. Right. Now I will say, I'm not a big fan of that movie series, so if I do recognize him, I'm like, oh, that's the best part of that movie series. It's Frank Chisser in there. So
I know. I was like, what is it?
Frank was such a good sport on the set too, because sometimes you have a favorite episode of a TV show that you watch over and over again.
Yep.
And he just happened to be in an episode of a Canadian cop show called Flashpoint. He was one of the two bad guys. And I had literally watched that episode like a dozen times. and when he was cast in Reconciler, I looked up his IMDb and I'm like, oh my goodness, that's one of the bad guys from the episode of Flashpoint that I really like. So the entire on the set, the whole time we had breaks, it was just, I couldn't keep my fanboyism in check. I kept on jokingly saying lines to him from the episode to see if he recognized it or not. He was a good sport about it.
Yeah, to answer your question, though, I knew a guy up in New York that had known Frank and actually Sherry and even Bob, who played the Detective Tilton. So they came, and that happens a lot in the indie film industry. It's like you get recommendations, for actors, and I'm like, yeah. So I brought them. Sherry's from Alaska, Bob's from Virginia Beach, and Frank was from Toronto.
Wow. So, I mean, were you footing the whole bill, having bring them all the way to PNW, or was that
Yeah.
just
Yeah, so I own the red camera. I didn't pay myself. Scott took deferral pay too, but it's still out of pocket. I spent about 45 grand to make it, which
All right.
is ultra
Yeah.
low budget. So
yeah, exactly.
But out of pocket though, that's not nothing.
Yeah, that's not nothing.
no. And it was, I mean, on paper, you could say it was $100,000 to $125,000 budget, probably if you had to rent the red camera and
Sure.
pay for things that we didn't. Maybe 150, but still, it was pretty minimal.
And you're talking about money, and speaking of, I understand there were some difficulties with the distribution of the reconciler. Is that correct? In regards to distribution rights and stuff like that?
Yeah, I don't want to get into it too much.
Okay, fair enough.
That's fine.
Let's just say there's some very nefarious people in distribution.
Who would have thought?
I found out that there were sales of the movie, the rights going on behind my back that I didn't even know that were happening. And I finally contractually, said, hey, and they weren't performing either in their quarterly statements to me on it. And I said, if you don't bring this up to date with, according to the contract, within 14 days, this, and this, and there was like zero response from them. So I just said, okay, it's mine again.
No, it's totally fair.
Good.
That's totally fair. And I'm glad you finally own your product again.
Thank you.
Very beautiful.
Own it again.
Absolutely.
I mean, in all honesty, I don't know about you, Brian. I think I've seen The Reconciler like 3 times now.
I've watched it
wow.
twice. I watched it once in preparation for the podcast, and then I once again for this to make sure that that I was remember everything right.
And in fact, I know we were talking about Nefarious earlier, but I actually saw it in the theaters back in Brian and I's hometown when I was visiting my parents, and I was like, man, Nefarious is terrible. You know what? We should watch The Reconciler instead. And I could not convince them to watch The Reconciler after that. But
did you know I was in The Reconciler as well? I had a cameo in that.
Yep, you were the guy in the voice.
You got it.
Yeah, I think I read that on IMDb, but I'm glad that was there. So.
Your Hitchcock moment.
I was actually
heavily
reading the lines
synthesized,
on set, and then we ADR'd him in.
Yeah.
And one thing that I should tell you that's interesting about the last scene of the movie is, just to give you an idea as to kind of the schedule that we were shooting on. The very last scene of the movie, when the boys come out of the warehouse and Detective Tilton finds them, Jeremy and Jordan, that was their last day of shooting. It's the last shot of the film. And they literally had to get on a plane 2 hours after we were shooting that. And Bob, who played Detective Tilton, had just come in the night before. So that was his very first thing that he shot.
Oh, no
So
way.
it was the last scene of the movie. It was the last thing the twins shot, but it was actually Bob's very first thing.
I just kind of had a thought. So on the bit for our episode, we kind of made a similar bit of the movie where we're both trapped in this apartment. We had to reconcile our opinions of The Reconciler. And
yeah,
I will say, talk about movies with, tight shooting schedules and, low budgets and all that. I will say I've read a lot of stories about Channel Awesome, which was the other villain in our podcast episode. If you're familiar with them, they're
the villain of my life, the bane of my existence. Channel Awesome.
They're like a movie review collective of people in Northern Illinois who have made movies on even stricter and lower budgets with less shooting time. And I can tell you, it sounds like you guys did a lot better with what you did than what they did. Because if you're ever interested, read the Change the Channel document, because there are some horror stories on those like week-long shooting schedules. Yeah.
No, the gulf of difference between like The Reconciler and the Channel Awesome films, like you guys are like clearly like I mean, you're like professionals. You're like, you work in things, Whereas, don't watch the Channel Awesome movies.
Yeah, don't. They're
kind of
movies,
mean-spirited, in my opinion.
Yeah, they're movies that I think they shot in like 7 days, and they're like 4+ hour movies. They would go through.
Oh my gosh!
They would go through like 20 pages of a script in a day, and they'd shoot for like 18 hours straight. They're really awful.
Oh my goodness!
No, I think you guys did a better job than they did. I'll just say
thank you.
Thank you.
Just a little bit, right?
Yeah, and I will say, talk about critic reviews one more time. So I guess other than our review too, but you include our review, what have been your reactions to some of the the uptick in the Reconcilers like critical reception? Because obviously you talked about this movie was released 8 years ago, and then within the last 3 months, it's just a whirlwind of opinions have come out about it.
Well, no, Scott, he said, very clearly that, there are some really good points that we knew afterwards. But I guess my opinion is I'm glad people are taking an interest in it, negative or positively, because it's hopefully still making a difference. But the thing that my attitude is, hey, it is what it is, and we did the best we could at the time with what resources that we had. And that's the best you can do. And I'm proud of, what we ended up with. They say that it's a miracle that any film ever gets done. So, we got it done in the can and moved on to the next one.
No, for
and
sure.
You guys you're still working. You still have projects on the furnace and things,
Yeah.
Yep.
Yeah. What's interesting about that is the fact that, I think we mentioned this in another podcast, Shawn. My original play was a lot shorter. It was only 40 minutes. The whole Laurie the reporter storyline was not in the play. That whole thing was added to make the film feature length because the distributors only wanted a feature length film. What's interesting now is another film that Shawn and I have collaborated on that's a short movie is getting a lot of attention and even won Shawn his first cinematography award at a film festival. And so with the benefit of hindsight, there's a part of me says, man, maybe we should have made this as a short. But if we had done that, we wouldn't have been Roddy Piper's last film because his storyline was in a storyline that Shawn literally wrote a week before we shot.
And especially now that this film has gotten a lot more traction. I mean, I don't think you guys are nearly as bad as this. I'm just going to put that out there. But the Room, for example, are you familiar with the story of Tommy Wiseau in The Room?
I'm familiar about the fact that it's a bad movie. I've never actually seen the film, though.
So basically, it was a movie that, opposite of low budget. It was like a $5+ million budget movie that made like $20 at the box office. Like nobody gave a crap about it. And then several years later, word of mouth went around about like, you have to see this movie. You have to see this movie. Is there ever been a thought that you guys would show this movie around and maybe like get an audience through word of mouth and stuff like that? Because I think you guys could do a good job on that.
The midnight movie circuit thing.
Yeah.
I'd love to. That sounds like a lot of fun. It really is a lot of fun to engage with audiences, and I'd be game, I guess.
Well, honestly, Brian, you were talking about obviously in the Portland area. I mean, what's that? I'm not going to dox you, Brian, but that one theater that does
Clinton Street.
Yep, exactly. I mean,
there's a lot of theaters here that do that, but there's like Clinton Street does midnight movie showings, and then Cinemagic. There's a lot of theaters around Portland that do stuff like that. There's definitely a thing for movies like The Reconciler that, they're independent films and they're kind of strange and offbeat, and they, for whatever reason or another, they find some sort of resonance. And I do think, I even think you're seeing with the surge of interest in The Reconciler now, I do think you're seeing something akin to that. It might never be like a Rocky Horror, like that. Yeah. But I do think that's. Do you guys have any projects coming up right now that you would like to talk about or are really excited about or anything?
Ooh, Scott, I know you were talking about it.
Yeah, I think the one that so what happened during COVID is Scott was like, let's do something again. And of course we were very limited by COVID, and he always wanted to work with Robert Shepard, who played Detective Tilton. Why did I come up with that name?
No, it's not good.
That's a mouthful, right? It sounded cool at the time.
We met on the set, but if you look at the movie, we never shared any screen time. But we had said that we'd wanted to work together if we had a chance. And Bob had been saying for years he wanted to work with Shawn again.
Sure.
Yep. So we ended up, Scott took a concept of a movie he wrote. He had that shopped around, but then there was a conversation that came out of that, without a super long story, that became this little short film that these two guys talking at a table based on the movie Heat with De Niro and
Ooh, Michael Mann classic, absolutely.
And our two characters that were talking at the table that Scott wrote were God and Lucifer. And they were, so I got that script, and my wife and I actually rewrote a lot of it for the screen, as like I like to call or say. And so there was we got together a couple of summers ago, shot it and released it last year, or was it earlier this year or last year? I can't remember.
We shot it 2 years ago this June.
Yeah.
We shot it 2 years ago this June.
Yeah, and it's a great conversation, but and since you're familiar with Portland, I have a home over in Sun River as well.
Yeah.
And so
The Caleb cabin.
Spent a lot of, and that's the Caleb cabin. That's right. I talked about that. And we spent a lot of our summers over there. I just pack up my computer system and edit client projects over there and such. And so I love the locations around there. The Paulina Peak, which is like an 8,000 foot peak, a part of an old extinct volcano. There's the Three Sisters Wilderness is just gorgeous. Yeah. Mm-hmm. And so instead of just two guys talking at a table, I was like, what if I incorporated the story element of if biblically, how it's called the temptation of Jesus, where Satan moves Jesus around to the top of the Temple Mount out into the desert and says, hey, if I make this bread and you because you're hungry, bow down and worship me and I'll make it bread. And, those kinds of things where he shuffles him around to different places. What if we had God shuffling Satan around to different places to kind of take him off guard. Yeah. So we actually do that throughout this 22, 23 minute short film, but they have this very intense conversation about mankind, about design, about, God's love for his creation and how he set forth the path of redemption, the reconciliation. And so it really keeps you on your toes of moving around. And that's a project that we are actually looking at, raising the money to create a television series, to have these different biblical stories that you often see.
An anthology almost.
Yeah. To a degree, you have like the story of Abraham and Isaac. You have Adam and Eve. You have, we've seen these biblical stories on screen over and over again, but what if you had this conversation going on kind of a little bit away from that of Satan or Lucifer, Satan and God, basically kind of not arguing, but dealing with each other around the Abraham and Isaac story, around, and so it's a little different, but we're excited about it.
It would be kind of like taking the dramatic license of who was pulling what string.
Oh, there you go. Okay.
Oh, yes.
During the Bible stories.
A little similar to like, what's that concept in, I think it's in like Greek theater of, is it the Seers or the Fates, where you have someone in the backdrop of a story that's kind of observing it, and is kind of commenting on it as it unfolds?
To a degree, yeah.
Just curious, is it through like a GoFundMe, or how exactly is this being fundraised?
Well, right now you can go to Shawn's website. You can go to Shawn's website and give to the project if you want to.
Okay.
We're trying to raise $600,000 to make the additional episode for a total of 6. Oh. Now, one thing that I tell a lot of people is, a lot of people's reaction is, wow, that's a lot of money. Particularly if you're talking to church people, they're like, oh, that's a lot of money. I don't have that kind of money, but I'll pray for you. And I'm like, well, we appreciate the prayers, but this thing is never going to exist if people don't. The reason it's called crowdfunding is because we're not looking for somebody to give us $600,000. We are looking for 10,000 people to give. We are looking for 60,000 people to give us $10 each. And little interesting tidbit here: your average sports stadium holds more than 60,000 people. So that's not very many.
No,
in the grand scheme of things.
No, 100%. Yeah. I mean,
you're
all right
with us sharing that link.
Oh yeah.
Like maybe in the description for this, or when we share the episode on social media. Can we do that?
Yeah, for sure.
Yes, please do.
100%. Yeah, and I will. I'll certainly spread it around to my various, no pun intended, but flock as well, because I do have a lot of people who are very religious. I actually grew up in the church a little bit myself, although I'm not as not particularly religious these days. But yeah, I mean, in general, I would be very much interested in seeing more of this project, because I actually did see the trailer for one of the episodes, and I believe that obviously, Scott, you played the devil in this one, correct? And then the other character in it was
there's only one episode so far. There's only one episode. We have the pilot, and that's which is the short film.
Okay, that is what I saw. Yeah,
that sounds like a cool project. It just sounds ambitious and kind of different. And I don't know, it's just I'd love to check that out.
Well, you can watch it on YouTube. Anybody can watch it on YouTube, and we're trying to see, do people want more?
And the link you guys post, which I'll give it to you. You actually can go to the webpage, and then there's the YouTube video right there.
Embedded in. Perfect.
Absolutely. So honestly, guys, it was fantastic talking to you. I really, really do appreciate this opportunity to talk to you. This was fantastic.
It was a lot of fun, guys. Thank you so much for having us.
Thank you.
Absolutely. And I mean, if we'll do a quick little plugs here. So if anybody listening to this, you can follow me at Carlos Chantor on Twitter.com.
Yeah, I'm not going to give my handle now. It just seems silly to be like, oh, we're making a cool TV show, and for me to be like, I have a Twitter.
Hey, come on. It's all good. We're still building an audience, Brian. Don't be humble here.
Do what
you guys can follow me at John Stab on Twitter. It's JONSTABB. But really what you should do, please, is we'll post that Shawn's link there with our description for this, and anywhere we post this. I'm going to check out the proof of concept of the pilot, and I would like everyone else to. It sounds cool.
Well, thank you.
Thanks. And would you guys else like to plug anything else?
No, but I would like to just say, you go ahead first, Shawn. You go first.
Well, yeah, I mean, I know we'll share the link, but it's pretty simple. It's justicepictures.com, and up on the right, on the the in development projects, that's where you find. Yeah, it's a Lucifer and the Father series. So
yes,
cool.
And I'm sorry, Scott, you were saying.
Oh yeah, well I had as far as things I'd like to plug, if anybody would like to check out the Mario cosplay group, it's the Mario Players that I'm a part of, and also if you want to check out any of my magic, you can check me out as the Great Scott on YouTube or on Facebook. There is just one other thing. This is something we've run into a lot on podcasts, and I think you guys brought it up during your review as well. So I just think we should end the podcast by setting the record straight. Yes, Shawn Justice is his real name.
Yeah.
The coolest part of that,
it's a cool name,
is that you said, right, that the action film that you made, right, is called Justice. That was not that wasn't in vanity. That was just, I mean, it's an action film. It makes sense. It all comes together.
It's true. I was like, man, what do I call this? I don't know. I'll just call it Justice for now. And I told the guys who bought it, who I'm doing some other projects with too. I said, hey, you can change it. It's okay. And they're like, no, we love it. So now you watch the movie and it's like Justice, story by Shawn Justice. That's one of the 4 writers, Shawn Justice.
That rules.
It's like something straight out of the 90s.
Name a movie after yourself, right?
Yeah. All right. Once again, thank you for being a part of this. I 100% hope everybody listens to this, and I certainly will donate.
Yeah.
To
we will, and we'll spread around. You guys have been so cool. We really do appreciate your time. You gave us these thoughtful responses. You were really good humored and just you're really cool and chill. We just thank you so much. This has been a really cool experience.
It was an honor, guys. Thank you so much.
Thank you so much. Have a good one.